This is Andi Purewal for Boxing News. I'm joined by Stephen Espinoza here in Las Vegas. Stephen, always a pleasure. Good to see you. How's life treating you?
Fantastic. Who's complaining this week, right?
Very true indeed. And we're back, another big Canelo fight, Mexican Independence Weekend. Is this as big as it gets?
You know, it is. And look, Berlanga's a good, solid opponent. You know, he's young, he's strong, he's clearly unintimidated. But we'll be honest, like Canelo has gotten to the point in his career where he's the spectacle, he's the draw. You know, Canelo on Mexican Independence Weekend it's a vibe, it's an experience, it's a spectacle, my man. So, you know, that's one of those things as a boxing fan you can't miss. Like when you've got a good, solid opponent, an entertaining opponent, you know, all the better. But ultimately, you know, the way we know he's a star, he's the foundation of the sport, is, you know, the weekend is built around this experience, about this atmosphere. This is what, you know, brings not just the fans to town. They built an entire business about this. Like every Mexican, you know, music act is performing within a couple days of the fight. It's a whole spectacle, and it's all because of the drawing power of Canelo.
You mentioned obviously how important this weekend is to Canelo. Obviously everybody who's going to be coming in, those Mexican Americans or people just from Mexico travelling up to kind of experience the entire event and atmosphere. UFC going against this on the same night. A surprise to you for them to think that it can challenge Canelo in Las Vegas on Mexican Independence Weekend?
Not so much a challenge, because I think Dana said, you know, early on, you know, he announced, you know, whether it's fear or not, he was going to take over these weekends. But, you know, clearly Canelo's unbothered, and no one's really all that concerned. You know, the fact is UFC had their event announced, and Canelo was insistent that he's doing this on the same weekend in Vegas nonetheless. So he's clearly unbothered and unconcerned about any potential, and I think now we're here in fight week. I think he's absolutely right. This doesn't feel any different or any smaller than any Canelo week that there is. You know, his drawing power is his drawing power, and nothing is going to alter that.
Do you think the numbers at all, whether it be pay-per-view buys, whether it be attendance at all, will be affected from having two big events in the same city on the same night?
You know, candidly, I struggled to figure out where the effect would be. Because the reality, Canelo fights are destination fights. So whether it's Southern California or Mexico or the rest of the U.S. or international, he's going to get his audience, you know, and UFC is going to get their audience. If they were both sort of splitting up just a local audience, then I'd say yes, there's some competition. But the reality is there's more than enough people willing to travel to Las Vegas to see a Canelo fight on Mexican Independence Day weekend. And on top of it, there really isn't as much of an overlap between the two sports as people think. Look, and if you're looking for a Mexican Independence Day weekend experience, look, putting the movie aside and the label aside, you know, there's one event that's really embracing the Mexican culture and the Mexican Independence Day experience, and that's the one that features Mexican fighters prominently in them and has the biggest Mexican star in combat sports.
Edgar Berlanga, for many, has kind of been written off before he's stepped foot in his first feet into the ring come Saturday night. What do you make of those who are writing him off, who see this as a routine fight for Canelo?
Look, I can see, because of how good Canelo has looked for so long, that you sort of default and, you know, he's going to walk through everyone but the most difficult challengers. But, you know, I'm reminded every time you think you know something for sure in this sport, the sport reminds you that you don't quite know everything that you know. So, you know, we've seen it before, whether it's, you know, AJ and Andy Ruiz that nobody saw coming. You know, that's just one that comes to mind. You know, even just a few months ago, you know, the Fundora-Tszyu fight, I think, was a surprise that we all witnessed in itself. So the reality is, nothing is for sure, and particularly when you have an opponent who's younger, stronger, bigger, and supremely motivated, you can't take anything for granted.
I know nobody's going to want to look beyond Saturday night, but there's going to be all this talk of what next for Canelo, and obviously he's spoken to the media, he did a huddle, and everybody's asking. There's one man in particular everyone would love to see, that's David Benavidez, but he continues to talk about he doesn't necessarily bring anything to the table. he wants a certain amount of money, which has been well documented. So then I asked if it's legacy alone, what fights are out there for you? And he said there's not many out there for him. So can you think of potential fights out there which would entice Canelo, which could be a challenge to Canelo off the top of your own head?
You know, that's sort of the challenge from both a practical perspective and a marketing perspective. You get to a point with superstar, once-in-a-generation fighters, it becomes difficult to convince them that any fight is going to be competitive. It happened with Floyd. It certainly, happened with Roy Jones. It's certainly happening with Canelo. So it's sort of like, until there's someone with, Hall of Fame level credentials, it's tough to pick against him. It takes things like going up a couple weight classes and taking on one of the best in the division, like the B-Bowl fight, for people to sort of view it as a 50-50 fight. But I think, in terms of legacy, Canelo has cleaned out a couple divisions. So it's sort of like, yes, from a legacy perspective, the one fight that people think is a legacy fight is David Benavidez. It's the only fight that people have unanswered questions about.
I know in the past you've had the likes of, say, Mulcharlo mentioned, but I know he's had a lot going on outside the ring, and I imagine it would be unlikely now that he would fight Canelo. So do you think with that, and obviously it doesn't seem like we're going to get the Terence Crawford-Canelo fight, he's mentioned Conor McGregor, do you think those are the types of fights that we might start to see him partake in, because it will bring in X amount of money and it will still be big events?
I'm not sure. Look, at this point, sort of financial is a draw, legacy is a draw, spectacle is a draw. All of those things are important. But Canelo's also somebody who's, a bit of a throwback, an old school fighter. Like he is very true to his own sport. So, look, the draw of doing something like a McGregor fight is interesting. But personally, I'd be surprised if he did something like that.
Moving away from Canelo, but speaking on one of his past opponents, Caleb Plant returns against Trevor McCumbee. What are you expecting to see in that fight?
Look, I think the same thing that we always see from Plant. A good, solid, fundamental fighter, very athletic, and he is, all that Caleb Plant has done is continue to take on the toughest fighters in the division. I think McCumbee's honestly a bit of an unknown quantity, having taken some time off. He's come back and looked good against not top-tier opposition. But, look, I think this is an opportunity for Caleb Plant to, get back on the right track and sort of set the stage for what's next in his career.
Obviously, Caleb's been willing to face anybody's defeats to Canelo Alvarez, David Benavidez, two of the top names in the division at that time. Obviously, I know David's moved up now, but looking towards the future, do you think maybe a Jaime Munguia fight might be possible? Or if, say, Canelo comes through Berlanga, obviously Berlanga and Caleb had their back and forths at the announcement press conference for this fight. Do you think that might be potentially in the running there, Caleb Plant versus Berlanga?
I love that matchup. Caleb Plant, Munguia would be a fantastic fight. I think, win or lose, I think Berlanga's an interesting fight. I think, Morel, if the weight class can be bridged, is there. And honestly, I still think there's unfinished business with Jamal Charlo when he decides he's ready to get back. So I think there's a lot of good options for Caleb Plant.
Mr. Erislandy Lara in a fantastic fight there with Danny Garcia. Danny's been inactive, but what do you make of that fight?
I think Danny has Danny's got a tough fight in front of him because of the size, because of the skill, because of a number of reasons. Having said that, that's what people said about Lucas Matisse, and we've seen Danny beat the odds before and surprise people. So I would never count Danny Garcia out, even at a big weight class against a well-established, very skilled champion.
Moving forwards onto some other events, Tank Davis. Everybody wants to know who he's going to face in November, that reported date in November. On the face of it, it would seem like kind of options are running out a little. Do you think that's fair to say? Or do you disagree with that?
No, I think the the options for a top tier fight for him are relatively limited. And as other fighters have either not been able to make deals or have taken other fights, then things start to get more and more narrow.
We saw Rayo Valenzuela being mentioned, but I know Robert Garcia's come out saying that he doesn't see that one taking place on November 2nd. So are there any options you can discuss? How close do you feel like a fight is for Tank in terms of being announced or being signed off?
I think we'll have an announcement within the next, certainly within the next couple weeks. I know Tank is adamant about fighting this year. Personally, I like the Valenzuela fight a lot, and there's a reason for it, like coming off of that really signature win for Rayo against Pitbull. So I think that's a possibility. There's certainly others, but I do think that it won't be too long before we have a Tank announcement.
And then just one other fight to get your thoughts on, Tszyu and Murtazaliev, the first fight, which isn't pay-per-view, between BBC and Amazon, and it's a fantastic fight at that.
It is, and I think for most boxing fans, Backram is an unknown quantity. Certainly, his record and his level of opposition speaks for itself. But I think what this shows is that Tszyu is a man of his word. He said he was coming in to not screw around, to take the toughest fights, to go straight to the top, and that's exactly what he's doing. Even when he's got other opportunities, perhaps for more money, perhaps things in Saudi Arabia, he wants the toughest fights. He wants to unify. He's not afraid of anyone in the division. He's a man of his word. He came in and said, "I'm going to fight the toughest guys." That's exactly what he's doing.
All right, Stephen, I've taken enough of your time now, so I'm going to leave you to enjoy the rest of your day, the rest of your time here in Las Vegas. Enjoy Saturday night, and thank you for speaking to me in Boxing News.
Pleasure to see you again.